Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're doing something a little different, but trust me, it's fascinating. We're going to be looking at how India keeps its financial systems, in check. Specifically, how it oversees all the professionals involved in bankruptcy cases.
It's like a corporate cleanup crew, but with, a lot of rules and regulations.
Exactly. And the document we're diving into today is the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India Inspection and Investigation Regulations 2017.
Yeah, no, that sounds a little dry, I know.
It does a little bit,
Yeah.
but don't worry. That's what we're here for, right? To unearth the good stuff.
Absolutely. Happy to help with that.
So, right off the bat, this document basically lays out a whole system for how the IBBI, that's the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India, keeps an eye on everyone involved in bankruptcy cases. We're talking insolvency professionals, the agencies, like the whole 9 yards.
And what's really interesting here is the level of detail they go into. It's not just, hey, don't be corrupt, They actually specify what kind of records these professionals need to keep, how inspections should be done, even down to how they handle a search warrant if they suspect there's something fishy going on.
Oh, wow. So it's like a whole playbook almost.
Exactly.
And I'm also seeing this big emphasis on transparency. Like if they end up penalizing someone, they have to actually publish that order online.
Yeah, it's all about maintaining public trust in the system. Because people need to know that if a company goes under, it'll be handled fairly.
That makes sense. So let's say you're a business owner in India. How does this actually impact you?
Well, for one thing, it means there's a system of accountability. If an insolvency professional isn't playing by the rules, they can be reported, investigated.
And penalized, right?
Yeah, potentially even penalized. But here's where it gets really interesting. The document even outlines how victims can actually claim restitution.
What?
Yeah. So if you lost money because of, say, a shady insolvency professional, you might be able to get some of that back.
Wow. I had no idea. It's like they've thought of everything.
Well, that's the point of regulations like these, right? They're there to try to anticipate problems and then provide solutions. It's definitely a complex system, but it's all designed to protect everyone involved and make sure things are fair, especially during such a messy process.
For sure. It's like knowing there's a safety net there, if things go south. But what happens when those guardrails you mentioned, those regulations, are actually crossed? Like, how does the IBBI step in and actually enforce things?
Well, that's where the whole investigation part of these regulations comes in. The IBBI actually has some pretty broad powers when it comes to investigating potential violations.
Okay, so like what? What can they actually do?
Well, they can demand to see all sorts of records. We're talking financial statements, meeting minutes, emails, really anything they think might be relevant to the case.
Oh, wow.
They can even conduct on-site inspections if they need to.
So there's no, like, hiding files in the back closet hoping no one will notice?
Not a chance. These regulations give them a lot of authority to make sure everything is above board, and if they do find something fishy, the consequences can be pretty serious.
Okay, so, like, what are we talking about here? Is it just a slap on the wrist, or are we talking about something more impactful?
Oh, no, it can definitely be a lot more than a slap on the wrist. It really depends on, how serious the violation is. But the IBBI can issue warnings. They can suspend a professional's license.
Really?
Yeah, and in some cases, they can even cancel it altogether, basically putting them out of business.
Wow, so the stakes are pretty high for these professionals.
Absolutely. It's not enough to just follow the rules on paper,
Yeah.
They really need to understand the why behind it all.
The emphasis on ethical conduct and transparency.
Exactly. These regulations are sending a very clear message that if you're going to be involved in insolvency proceedings in India, you need to be operating with the utmost professionalism and integrity.
It sounds like a really robust system designed to protect everyone involved and maintain confidence in, the Indian economy as a whole. Are there any, like, real-world examples of these regulations in action where they've actually made a difference?
Absolutely. There was a case a few years back involving a large textile company that was facing insolvency. And the insolvency professional who was appointed to oversee the process was actually accused of working with some of the creditors to undervalue the company's assets.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which could have really hurt the other stakeholders.
Yeah.
But because of these regulations, the IBBI was able to quickly investigate the claims. They ended up uncovering enough evidence to have the professional suspended and started taking steps to recover the assets that had been undervalued.
That's amazing. It's one thing to, have these rules on paper, but it's another to see them actually being used and, like, making a real difference.
Right. It really shows that they're serious about enforcing these standards.
Yeah. This has been incredibly insightful. Before we move on, is there anything else in these regulations that stood out to you as being particularly important for our listeners to kind of understand?
One thing that I find really interesting is just how much emphasis these regulations put on record keeping.
I mean, that seems kind of like a no-brainer, right? For financial professionals,
Yeah.
I mean, keeping accurate records.
You would think so, but these regulations, they go like above and beyond. They outline very specific types of records that need to be kept and for how long. And it really highlights how important it is to have meticulous documentation during these processes.
So it's not enough to just do things right. You need to be able to prove you did them right.
Exactly. It all comes back to transparency and accountability.
Yeah, and this isn't just about catching the bad guys. It's about making sure the whole system is open and accountable.
To the public. Yeah.
It's about building trust, really. Trust in the system, trust in the professionals involved, and ultimately trust in the Indian economy as a whole. It's really about like shining a light on the whole thing, making sure everyone knows it's on the up and up. And that kind of transparency, I imagine, goes a long way.
Oh, absolutely. Especially in finance, right? Where trust is, like everything. These regulations, they really show that India is serious about doing this right.
Yeah.
Making a system that's not just, fair and effective, but also transparent, accountable.
Yeah, for sure. And, we've really seen that playing out, haven't we? I mean, we started with what seemed like kind of a dry document about regulations.
Right.
And we ended up uncovering this whole system, all designed to protect India's financial system.
Yeah. And it's a good reminder that even when we're talking about, technical rules and regulations, they still have a real impact. These rules, they affect businesses, investors, even everyday people.
Absolutely. Well, we've come to the end of our deep dive today. But before we go, we want to leave you with something to think about. As India's economy grows and changes, how might these regulations need to change too, to keep up?
Yeah, that's a big one. What new challenges might pop up? And how can India make sure that transparency and accountability, those key ingredients, how can they make sure those stay front and center?
Such good questions. And something for all of you listening to explore further. Until next time, happy diving.